When I think about the more unsavory corners of Americana and its popular culture, what often comes to mind is daytime trash TV, particularly from the 1990s. Its history, however, is grounded in more than the public's morbid curiosity in the outrageous and provocative. Like so many things, the model for exploitative daytime TV began as one thing, then slowly devolved into what we knew in the 1990s as trash TV. But when was this created? Who were its major players? And what is the lasting legacy of trash television that we still see in our media today? When daytime television programming first began airing in the 1950s and 60s, shows were primarily aimed toward the American housewife at home. Topics about cleaning, cooking, and other womanly duties were the go-to subject matters. When it comes to programming geared for shock value, the 50s and 60s were more quieter on this front. The closest instance was when radio and television host Les Crane, host of The Les Crane Show, who normally conducted interviews with newsworthy figures of the 1960s like Malcolm X, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr., interviewed Randy Wicker, the first openly gay man on television. But as America in the 1960s went on, there was widespread change occurring everywhere, mainly due to the conflict in Vietnam. The counterculture movement was in full effect, and more social issues were coming to the forefront of Americans' consciousness. There was now an awareness that people and things could be different, breaking that conventional homogeneous mold that the 1950s had worked so hard to solidify. Phil Donahue was the first to see that this was an arena worth exploring. The Phil Donahue Show, beginning in 1967, covered social and political issues such as AIDS, interracial adoption, and infidelity during its 29-year run until its cancellation in 1996. But it wasn't just his penchant for hot topics that was later replicated in iconic 90s trash TV. It was his presentation that created the modern-day TV talk show model. Instead of remaining seated while doing an interview, Phil would roam the audience, keeping the viewpoint of the crowd as he asked his guests questions. He'd allow the audience to participate and be involved, creating an environment that thrived on their interactions and opinionated reactions. The 1980s would show a further rise in popularity of this model with the likes of Sally Jessy Raphael and, of course, Oprah Winfrey. Though these shows mostly stayed on the tamer side of issues, focusing mostly on family and romantic relationships. But the two shows that really broke the doors wide open in the 1980s to demonstrate just how popular trash television could be were the Morton Downey Jr. Show and the Heraldo Rivera Show. Morton Downey Jr. was known for his brash, confrontational style, inciting fights, using offensive language, and preaching his conservative viewpoints to guests while chain-smoking throughout the episodes. Rivera had already been known for his ability to create television spectacle after pulling 60 million viewers for his failed special, The Mystery of Al Capone's Vaults. But the most notable episode of the Heraldo Rivera Show was a 1988 episode titled Teen Hate Mongers, where producers placed members of the White Aryan Resistance movement on stage with the national chairman of the Congress of Racial Equality, Roy Innis. Of course, all hell broke loose when Innis, known to have a short temper, began choking a member of the movement, sparking an all-out riot. Heraldo himself would be hit with a flying chair, breaking his nose in the process. This, of course, did not stop Heraldo from finishing the taping, instead choosing to continue on with blood running down his face. Both Morton Downey Jr. and Heraldo Rivera shows exemplified the rise of something called confrontainment, where producers strategically aimed to put together shows with groups of people that would potentially create the most chaos, while still running on topics that still, at least on the surface, appear to be legitimate stabs at addressing American cultural and social conundrums of the times that Phil Donahue had popularized. Which finally brings us to the 1990s. While the Donahue model became the working standard, the spectacle format was now too enticing to ignore, even though shows from Maury and Jerry Springer, both debuting in 1991, began as Donahue ripoffs. The Jerry Springer Show, hosted by former Cincinnati Mayor Jerry Springer, was on the verge of cancellation in 1994. With nothing to lose, Springer and his producer decided to take off the gloves, change the format, and be more wild and outlandish, similar to Rivera's show, with episode titles such as I Married My Horse, Jerry Springer Confronts the KKK, and Breaking the Sex Record. The Jerry Springer Show became a full-blown exploitative carnival that was essentially pro wrestling disguised as a talk show, to the point you felt Jerry was only there to act as a spiritual referee. The show would prove so popular that it would even pass Oprah in the ratings for a brief time in 1998, averaging 10 million viewers. The Maury Show, later rebranded simply as Mory in 1998, would attempt to remain more conspicuously virtuous, though it was clear its format was meant to be just as exploitative. With the grandfatherly Mory hosting, it sought to help cheating lovers come clean, expose others with a lie detector test, send unruly kids to boot camps, and the show's biggest pull, administering paternity tests with Mory's go-to verdict:
when it comes to 3-year-old Landon, Ryan, you are not the father.
Jerry Springer and Mory would prove the true kings of 90s trash TV, as both shows would stay on the air long after their peaks. The Jerry Springer Show would finally go off the air in 2018, while Mory stuck to his tried and true formula until his retirement in 2022. And this was just the beginning, as more than 24 talk shows would spawn up in the 1990s, all with their own unique shticks, including the Ricky Lake Show, the Montel Williams Show, and the Ginny Jones Show, which had its own particular controversy in 1995, involving a murder of one guest by another guest following their appearances on the show. Long story short, this was a Secret Admirer episode in which a man, Jonathan Schmitz, was invited on the show to have his secret admirer, Scott Amager, revealed to him. Scott was someone Schmitz already knew, however, with Schmitz being heterosexual and with the times being more testy in regards to homosexuality, Schmitz was clearly left humiliated as Amager was revealed to be his crush, while footage of him expressing his certain desires for Schmitz rolled on with the two on stage together. Later, after the taping, Schmitz would drive to Amager's trailer and shoot him with a 12-gauge shotgun, later to be convicted of second-degree murder. Ginny Jones herself had to testify on whether or not the show was responsible in provoking the murder, as a simple background check on Schmitz would have revealed an extensive history of mental illness. This also brought to light rumors that participants would be liquored up prior to tapings, as well as producers searching trailer parks for potential guests for the show. Which brings me to my next point, the exploitation of guests. Not only was it embarrassing for guests to drag their way too personal and private matters onto national TV, but these shows were problematic for how it took advantage of marginalized groups such as people of color, the poor working class, and members of the LGBT community. Though Jerry Springer would later argue that putting a spotlight on these groups normalized them in the public eye. But it was also hard to ignore the appeal of these guests wanting to be on these sort of shows, with promises of attention and validation from a large studio audience. As it would be common for guests to be regular viewers of the shows they appeared on, eventually they'd also come to understand the game and the formula of how these shows worked, to then engage in the whole meta experience of putting their lives and issues in the spotlight, but still be willing to sort of play along as they were familiar how these shows typically went. And I guess that's why some of the not the fathers always had their dance rehearsed and ready to go. But the whole experience is bizarre, knowing that these are problems guests still have to deal with long after the trip ends, unless of course they prove themselves worthy or entertaining enough to return for another episode. Like a car crash you can't look away from, daytime TV was putting on display anything from people dealing with basic relationship problems to complete so-called oddities, fostering a televised freak show starring real people. But while this was arguably just the car crash effect playing out, there was also this justification in watching programming like this that could help you, the viewer, shape some moral opinion about society, something that the Reagan era of the 80s was characterized by, as it was so obsessed with America's moral purity. But let's face it, this was the definition of a guilty pleasure in its truest, darkest form. Trash TV in the 90s would become popular enough to catch the attention of Senators Joe Lieberman and Sam Nunn, along with conservative pundit William J. Bennett, as they launched a campaign in 1995 to take the trash out of daytime talk shows. To do so, they took out their own ads, urging other advertisers to pull their dollars, but this of course would prove fruitless as these shows only grew more and more lucrative. Which brings me to touch on an indirect effect of trash TV, the advertising aspect. If you've ever seen the commercials that take place during daytime TV, you've been sure to see a swath of ads for injury attorneys, car insurance, title loan companies, and for-profit universities. The average demographic of a daytime television watcher is over the age of 60, makes less than $20,000 a year, and does not possess a college degree. All to say that even the commercials for trash TV is wired to exploit viewers who are financially insecure with promises of a better life. So what is the legacy of 90s trash TV that we still see today? Well, look no further than reality TV beginning in the 2000s. Starting with basic reality game shows, its scope has only narrowed to the everyday lives of people from rich housewives to the many niche shows found on the TLC network, including Dance Moms, Overweight People, and International Lovers. There's such an infinite amount of content now that it's mostly normalized what we once thought of as shock value. But I would say given the atmosphere of the 1990s coming off the heels of the 80s, the shock was never greater felt here than during the peak of these particular talk shows. Housekeeping. Please like the video if you would. Tell me what you remember most about 90s TV talk shows, whether those memories be fond guilty pleasures or if those memories make you sick to your stomach. Please don't litter, and I'll see you.